This video is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Hey guys, Big Paul here today. We are going to talk about the 3 phases of steroid cycles. Actually, there's kind of 4, but if you're a competitor, but if you want to blast and cruise, I think a lot of guys get confused about this. There's really 3, maybe a 4th phase, but I'm going to talk about those today. To make sure that you're cycling correctly and you understand the purpose of each phase. I think people get confused. They don't know what compounds to take when, and they end up just fucking themselves up and not making any progress. We are going to fix that today and talk about the phases of steroid cycles in just 1 minute. All right, the first phase of steroid cycles, phase 1. This is the off-season phase, the bulking phase. I really don't like the term bulking because that can be interpreted as getting fat. But if we're a physique athlete, this is our hypertrophy phase. If you're a strength athlete, this is when you're trying to increase strength. But I'm talking about this from a physique perspective. So the off-season phase is our hypertrophy phase where we're trying to grow muscle. All right, so we want to engineer our steroid cycle, our compound choices, our doses towards hypertrophy. And when we're looking at this, we want to pick compounds that are conducive for hypertrophy. And one thing we know about hypertrophy, higher doses lead to more hypertrophy. There is a direct correlation between them. I'm not saying go out and blast 3 grams of gear right out of the gate, but in order to run higher doses, we want to keep toxicity low. We don't want to be running very toxic compounds like we do on contest prep. This is where dudes fuck up all the time and they run a shit ton of toxic orals right out of the gate. And then they just get themselves in a state where they're sick, their blood values are all out of whack, and in the first 6 weeks of a cycle, and they can't stay on long enough, or they're too toxic to even have a productive hypertrophy phase. During this phase, we are going to be hypercaloric. We are going to be eating in excess of calories. So we don't need the toxic drugs like we do on contest prep that protect muscle loss. Things like tren that allow you to eat in a deficit and maintain, possibly gain muscle. But tren is very toxic. Some of the orals that we take during contest prep that improve body composition but are toxic. Things like Winstrol, Anavar, Halotestin. We don't need those in the off season. We don't need that toxicity because we're not as concerned about body composition. So in the off season, typically we stick to basic compounds that are well tolerated. And that varies from person to person. I've seen some people that tolerate nandrolone very well. Some do not. Some tolerate equipoise very well. Some do not. People, really like primobolan, and I've had dudes come to me and say that all their hair falls out and their blood pressure shoots through the roof with primobolan. So you got to figure out what works for you, and then usually in the off season we're going to run a test base as high as we can tolerate without using aromatase inhibitors. So you got to figure out where that's at, and then you make up the difference by pushing low side effect, low risk anabolic on top of that, or maybe 2 anabolics. If sometimes I will do a mix of maybe primobolan and nandrolone, because if you run nandrolone too high, sometimes it can cause issues. So I use primobolan to fill in the gap. I also, on the off season, I slowly escalate doses. You don't need high doses right out of the gate. You're going to progress off of a little because you're hypercaloric. Also, we're going to add things in like GH and insulin to help drive nutrients, help us to use more nutrients in our diet, that also allows us to use less gear. So that is the phase one, what I call the hypertrophy phase. We want to be smart with it. We want to use gear that's not harsh, get gear that promotes muscle growth. We want to keep our estrogen as high as we possibly can without having to use an aromatase inhibitor without incurring side effects. Estrogen is cardioprotective, estrogen is neuroprotective, and estrogen helps with muscle hypertrophy. Phase two, the second phase that we use in our year-round blast and cruise, is the cruise phase. I call it the health and maintenance phase. The whole idea of the cruise phase is to get your body back into some sort of homeostasis, allow it to reduce stress from training, from running all the toxic gear, from eating a shit ton of food. We want to get rid of that stress, get our organs healthy, get our joints healthy, get our connective tissue healthy, and have us ready for contest prep and for our next phase. Usually that phase is something like 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 12 weeks. I like to run an 8-week cruise. That seems to be enough time to wash off the stress, get my blood work back into a good spot. And a lot of times in the off season when you're using long-acting compounds, they're still going to be present in your system anyway as you're on that phase. So I usually just reduce my compounds down to just TRT, something like 200, 250 milligrams a test, depending on how big you are. And I pull my training back to just maintenance volume, just enough to maintain the size that I put on in the off season. I don't want to push it any more than that. I don't go to failure. I don't push hard in this phase because I want to allow myself to recover and be fresh for contest prep, for the fat loss phase. I've made that mistake in the past where I've pushed too hard all the way into prep, and then you just dig yourself into a fatigue hole, and your contest prep just gets shittier and shittier and shittier and shittier and shittier as you go through it. And you accumulate all the stress and you end up having injuries. You can't sleep. You get yourself in a cortisol dominant environment and it's just awful. And there's no way you can dig yourself out of it until you come off of prep. You just can't. You either have to cancel prep or just push through it and feel like fucking shit. That's probably not healthy for you. I get dudes all the time that reach out to me that are trying to justify running other drugs during the cruise phase, which is our phase to reduce stress. They want, I just had a guy last week, hey, can you run low dose trim? Maybe eke some gains out of when you're just eating maintenance calories. No, it defeats the purpose of the cruise, of the maintenance phase. The whole idea of this phase is to reduce stress, get our body ready for the next push. So no, you don't want to bridge with Anavar. No, you don't want to bridge with Tren. You don't, none of that. Take us down to the absolute minimum that's required to maintain the size that we've put on in our off-season size push. I found for me, 200 milligrams a test, 200, maybe 250, 2 units of growth hormone is plenty. I am more than capable of maintaining my size on that. I know guys will poo-poo that all day long and say that's impossible. I mean, my test levels are like 1,200. You think you can't maintain size with a test level of 1,200? It just makes no sense to me. You guys think you have to run a gram of gear year round to maintain size. You don't have to. It doesn't take much if you're still training and you're still eating healthy. I think what ends up happening a lot of times is dudes go on cruise. They don't have the central nervous system drive from all the androgens that they had before, and they just fucking stop training and they eat like shit. They use it as an excuse to eat like an asshole. No, this is a time to get healthy. You want to pull your calories back. You want to eat healthy. You want to stick to your diet. Pull your training back, but still train. Let your body wash off all this stress. Be ready for the next phase. Phase 3. This is our fat loss phase. For us competitors, contest prep, we call it. This is the hardest, most stressful phase of the year for your body. I know people think putting size on is tough on you. No, it is not. This is where your blood work, your health markers are usually the worst at the end of contest prep than they are at any other point of the year. You're using the most toxic compounds you're overtraining deliberately, you're fatigued, you dig yourself into a hole, you feel like shit by the time the end of contest prep comes around, and your blood work reflects it. So, as I mentioned the last time, if we keep pushing right into contest prep, you're already in a hole, and you're going to be in an even worse hole. I think this is why a lot of times dudes end up looking like shit when they get on stage. They're like, I don't know what happened. No, I've been there. I've done it myself. I push and I push and I push and I push, and it's hard for me to back off. So I get it. But if you have yourself dug into such a fatigue hole, such a hole where you can't keep up, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse as contest prep goes. And you have no opportunity, unless you pull out of your show, to let your body heal and recover. You just don't until things are over. So we want to be as fresh as possible at the beginning of that contest prep, because this is the time of the year where we're going to be incurring the most stress. We're probably going to be using the most drugs. We're going to be using the most toxic drugs. We are going to be training our hardest. We are going to not be sleeping well. We're going to be using a bunch of fucking stimulants and fat burners. We're going to be waking up early. It's just a stressful period of time. So make sure you're as healthy as possible and ready to go for this phase. Now, the last one, I'm not going to dig into it. Phase 4, really, is the post-show rebound. I'm probably going to do a separate video on this. This is really just a kind of a mini hypertrophy phase. Guys fuck up on this all the time, and I'm going to dig into it deeper in its own video. This is just another hypertrophy phase. I think what ends up happening after contest prep, people are mentally fatigued. They're hungry, and they end up just binging, and they don't work out. They're fatigued. They don't feel like working out. They're hungry. They just binge on food. In just all the worst possible behaviors. If you can push yourself through this phase, it doesn't take long. 6 to 8 weeks. Usually I back my gear down to safe stuff, run half or a third of the total load that I was during my contest prep. So let's say I was up to 2 grams of gear during my contest prep. I may pull down to something like 600 milligrams, just some test in nandrolone, or just some test in primobolan, a little bit of GH, maybe some insulin, just enough to promote growth. You're going to grow from just the food alone. And you keep training, and you slowly ramp down your fat burners, and you let your body will actually heal and grow at the same time. So you want to kind of, don't use this as an excuse to be unhealthy. I think this is where a lot of guys end up just fucking their whole off season up. They eat like assholes for 2 months. They don't train, and then they're fucked. When you go into your off season mass phase, your insulin sensitivity is already screwed up. You've already accumulated a bunch of body fat. You don't have a lot of runway to put on size. You're not in a healthy spot to be ready for an off season push. And then usually after the rebound, usually 6 to 8 weeks, I'll take another cruise. Just let myself get healthy, maintain the size that I regained after the rebound, and then we are ready for another off season. Rinse, wash, and repeat. We do the same thing over again. So that's how I break down the phases. This is, like I said, this is where guys fuck up. They have no plan for the year. They have no concept of what they're trying to do. They just are like, I'm going to run gear. I'm going to eat. And then this is another big mistake. I can't emphasize this enough, is that people constantly flip-flop. I see it all the time with people I work with. They'll get 3 weeks into a mass phase, and they'll be like, I think I'm getting too fat. I'm going to switch to cutting. And then they do 3 weeks of cutting. I'm back to being good. I want to go back into contest, go back into, switch from the mini contest prep or mini cut. I fucking hate the term mini cut. I'll be honest with you. It's just bullshit. And then they switch back and forth. They just keep flopping back and forth. And then when you do that, you can't make any progress. It's why you see so many people that just look the same year after year, because of the way they've structured their cycles and the way they've structured their program. They have no plan. Stick to a phase. When you're in the off season, it sucks. You're gonna get a little bit fatter than you like to be. When you're on contest prep, it sucks. Bodybuilding is an arduous process. Building physique is an arduous process. There's nothing easy. There's nothing fun about it. You're uncomfortable pretty much all the time. In the off season, you're full. You're bloated. You got shitty sleep apnea. When you're on contest prep, you're on all the fucking stems, you can't sleep. Really, the best time of the year is when you're on cruise. That's when you feel the best. So take advantage of those times to heal. Commit to a phase when you get to it. Make sure you stick to it, work through it, and see it through to the end, and then shift gears after you've recovered into the next phase. And I promise you will see more gains that way. All right, guys, thank you for watching my video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Hopefully this was helpful. For coaching or consultations, head over to www.anabolicbodybuilding.com to book your spot today. I can help you with optimizing hormones, fat loss, muscle gain, physique, athletic performance, nutrition, and health. For more information, shoot me an email at bigp3rd@gmail.com.